Welcome back to M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal. I'm your host, Lisa Scott. On this show, we go beyond the headlines and boardroom announcements to explore what really happens after a deal closes, where strategy meets reality. Today, I'm excited to have a guest who is operating at one of the most critical intersections in business today, AI and the law. Rob Taylor is of counsel and head of AI Triage Center at Karstens, Allen, and Gorley, and co-founder of NextSolve. He advises companies navigating AI adoption, intellectual property, data rights, and legal risk. What I appreciate about Rob is that he doesn't speak in legal jargon. He brings clarity to complex technology issues and understands the business side of law. In this episode, we're going to talk about how AI is changing due diligence, contract structures, privacy, and post-merger integration, and what smart companies should already be doing to prepare. So, Rob, welcome to the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So let's start off with a little bit about your background. The intersection that you're working in, AI, law, and business, how did you kind of get into that space to begin with? And what did you start out doing versus what you're doing today?
Well, for my entire legal career, I've been a technology lawyer. I've worked, starting out in telecom, doing actually telecom antitrust litigation, where I had to kind of understand how the telecom networks function and things like that in order to address antitrust issues, and then progressed into computer telephony and then cybersecurity, been in-house counsel at different companies, general counsel. And then, of course, more recently, we're coming up on 3 years since ChatGPT came out. Generative AI is really a new industrial revolution. And so I had clients that were in the tech space that invested heavily in generative AI solutions, building them, rolling them out, and across all industries. And so I was kind of in a fortunate position where I just got immersed. I mean, there was no playbook on how do you assess AI risk, generative AI risk when it came out. So we used to joke, myself and the in-house legal team and others, that we were building the plane, putting the wings on the plane while it's going down the runway, hoping it's going to take off by the time we get to the end of the runway, right? But through the process of just huge immersion in all these solutions and having to understand what these solutions are doing, their features, functionality, the architectures, the data flows, what inputs are being ingested, where do those inputs come from, what is the solution doing to process that data, what kind of outputs is it creating, where do those outputs go? How is the business relying upon those outputs? Does it propagate to other databases? So it's really a matter of connecting all the dots. And so probably 90% of my practice now is artificial intelligence, because most tech companies are figuring out how they can adopt AI either in their product sets or in their internal operations. So that's kind of how I ended up here. And so to date, I probably evaluated in the hundreds of generative AI solutions in the last 3 years. And collectively, my clients have invested over $1 billion in bringing these solutions to market. So it's kind of like if you've ever had a foreign language immersion course where, you just dive in and you end up trying to speak the language and stuff. But I'm not an engineer. I'm a poli-sci econ major, a double major undergrad. But I've always been a curious person. Maybe I should have been an engineer. I remember my parents gave me a book called Tell Me Why, and I used to always ask, well, why is it this way, and why is that, and how does this, So I was very inquisitive, and you have to do that to practice in this field of what I call AI law, because all the risk comes from the technology primarily. So if you don't understand the technology, you're going to miss identifying the risk. And our job as lawyers is to make sure our clients make informed decisions about the risk. So we've got to identify it. So if we don't, take the time and effort to dive deep into the technology, we're not going to be able to identify risk. And I think that's a big mistake. A lot of lawyers are not so technology focused in their practice. And I've heard lawyers say, well, I'm just the lawyer. I don't need to understand the technology. To me, that's like malpractice, especially in this area, because so much of the risks are not obvious. And the only way you kind of uncover them is diving deep in with the technical teams, understanding all this stuff. You really have to roll up your sleeves. And so over and over, having done hundreds of these solutions, I've figured out kind of where my focus and line of inquiry is. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like pulling the thread on a sweater. The business and the technical people that are not used to dealing with somebody like me who can understand technology and wants to learn it,
Mm-hmm.
they try to give you the high level overview of, well, it's really simple. There's not much going on here. Nothing to see, nothing to worry about. Move along, right?
Right.
But when they send you information and you start asking questions, it's like pulling the thread on a sweater, and sometimes you find out a lot more. I think I spend half my time just trying to get at, the truth of what the solution does, how it
Mm-hmm.
functions. It's almost like taking a hostile deposition. Not that people are
Right.
trying to hide stuff from you. It's just you really have to be diligent in uncovering the specific facts and details in order to be able to assess the risk and advise.
Yeah.
So,
And things are moving fast. So, I mean, it might be hard to
yeah.
catch the risk or get somebody to slow down enough to think about the risk. But I have
Well,
a
yeah.
lot of, yeah, I have a lot of questions about risk, which I want to talk about and the blind spots. But first, I wanted to get an understanding of what the AI triage center is that you're the head of at your law firm.
Okay. Yeah. So we essentially established this to help clients no matter where they are on their AI journey. So some have brought me in. Actually, my larger client brings me in at the whiteboarding stage when they're, creating the concept of the solution and they're kind of sketching it out. We're kind of joined at the hip through the process of the development and then the phases of testing, and then deployment and then post-deployment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then others, I have a new client that approached about, actually, they heard me speak at a conference about a week ago, and they were freaked out. They were like, well, we have AI chaos in our organization. There's people using shadow AI. It's just out of control. This is a large company, and so, the head of tech was like, we got to get a grip on this. And so
Mm-hmm.
he came up with like two immediate projects. So they're later in that AI journey, right? They've already adopted stuff where they've allowed things to happen that they need to, tighten down, like only allowing employees to use sanctioned AI solutions that have been vetted and supported by the company, not using DeepSeek, not using free versions of ChatGPT, which can seriously compromise confidentiality and trade secrets.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to talk about that next. So here's a question to open up all of these areas. What do you think most companies still don't understand about AI risk? And where do you see the biggest blind spots right now?
The majority of companies, and there have been reports about this, a lot of companies don't know what they don't know about the risk, right? And especially with the startups and some, aggressive growth companies, the adage, just move fast and break it, don't worry about it, and compliance is kind of like, well, yeah, sure thing. Yeah, we'll do that, but it's not like the primary focus of these teams. It's just like, we got to get this solution to market, we got to deploy it, we're under a deadline,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like an afterthought. So I think also lots of companies, they don't know how to assess risk. The CISOs, they look at things from a security perspective. The technology person, the CTO, looks at things from the tech stack. Like, is this a good, stable platform?
Mhm.
They are not typically experienced in assessing, well, where are the legal risks that arise from this solution?
Mhm.
Are we in a high risk use case? What are kind of the inherent risks with what we're building? And then how do we try to mitigate those things? So it's a process, and there's no smartest person in the room. You really need lots of points of view. It's a cross-functional team,
Mhm.
but you have to have people with experience in order to assess it. I hear a lot about, companies, they have an AI governance committee. And my question is, well, great. Does anybody on the AI governance committee have any experience with AI? Are they just kind of figuring it out on the fly, right? They're
Mhm.
going to miss a lot of stuff, right? They need to bring in external advisors, external counsel,
Mhm.
consultants that can help guide them. And, eventually they can kind of learn, but, experience really matters in this area. And as things are you know, highly evolving, it's getting more complex, especially, this is the year I'm seeing on roadmaps of solutions I'm vetting that are all moving towards agentic AI. And there's kind of a spectrum of that. But, the fully autonomous, it really enhances your risk profile because you don't have the human in the loop. If it's fully autonomous,
Oh.
which has been kind of the safety net with, mitigating against bias, errors, and hallucination. As long as you have the human in the loop, you can try to prevent that. But once you take the human out of the loop and it's autonomous and it's making decisions,
Mm.
your risk profile goes up. And so then how do you solve for that? So I feel like we've almost had to go back to the drawing board with agentic
Mhm.
AI, kind of like where we were with generative AI.
Well, maybe we should educate the audience a little bit because I mean, I think there is a gap right now, understandably, in understanding anything about AI. I mean, we're all trying to understand it, but it's not everyone's at kind of different points in the process. Some of which are just they just hear AI and they're tired of hearing it and they don't want to hear it anymore. But I
Yeah.
was thinking, maybe you could just sort of explain what are the types of AI, like what and how do they impact like the risk?
Right. So the most commonly deployed AI today is generative AI. Most companies that are building AI solutions are using generative AI as opposed to traditional machine learning or others. So that trend's going to continue, and now we're seeing agentic AI. But essentially, most people have familiarity with ChatGPT, which is just a chat
Hmm.
tool. You can query, ask questions, it gives you an answer, right? And that is the public versions are all based and trained on what was on the internet, essentially. And so they can, either give you a real answer or they can make one up. And they're really good at making stuff
Hmm.
up, which are hallucinations, right? And the generative AI is, LLMs, large language models, are predictive. They kind of predict answers. They predict, it's not intelligent. It's kind of like when you're using, the text messaging and you're typing in and it tries to anticipate what you're going to say next or the word, and it's not always right. It's like, no, that's not where I'm going. It's like it's
Yeah.
like the really obnoxious person in a conference room
Hmm.
who interrupts the speaker, and tries to finish their thoughts and sentences when that's not where you're going, right?
Right.
Um, so so generative AI, it's predicting and it's processing data to provide an outcome and create something. So like a translation or a summary of a document
Okay.
and things like that. But, most of the solutions I see that companies are building are their solutions using LLMs, large language models, to take a workflow
Hmm.
and a process and take tasks in the process and outsource the tasks from humans
Hmm.
to an AI solution, a generative AI solution. And so it's not just using a chat tool. Some of those solutions do have chat interfaces depending upon what the use case is. And I heard at one conference, someone mentioned that there was a quote that someone said, well, AI is like the new India, because, India just exploded with the outsourcing boom. But now the
Oh.
outsourcing industry is outsourcing
Hmm.
itself to AI.
Right.
And clients expect that because they've been used to paying for headcount,
Yeah.
in order to outsource a service to them. And so they expect you will leverage AI and then we don't need to use as many people and therefore I shouldn't have to pay as much, right?
Hmm.
Without consideration of the cost of building those solutions and the technology. But
Hmm.
in essence, that is where the focus is right now. It's all on generative and it's creating things, whether it's creating an image,
Hmm.
typing in text, creating something, or searching a knowledge base. You can create your own instance that it taps a dedicated knowledge base of information that you want to query as
Hmm.
opposed to searching the internet. And
Right.
by
Yeah.
having a knowledge base that's fit for purpose for the particular use case, you're going to have more accuracy and less hallucinations, hopefully. And there are ways to handle all of that. But now agentic AI is just another flavor of generative AI, except it's instead of one generative AI solution, it can be just a host of solutions that talk to each other and they iterate.
Mm.
And instead of giving specific prompts to process data, what prompts or instructions to the large language model,
Hmm.
instead of giving those specific prompts, you can give a general prompt and
Hmm.
it will figure out what it needs to do. And then it collaborates with the other agents
Yeah. That.
who do different, that agentic, the different agents perform distinct functions and
Hmm.
they all collaborate to create the output. I have one solution that's
Mhm.
in my pipeline that's got over 37 agents in it. And so it's a very complex structure.
Mhm.
You know, most of the generative AI stuff before was, well, it was kind of one solution. It
Mhm.
did some defined tasks. And now it's like taking it to a whole nother level. You've got all these AI solutions talking to each other,
Yeah.
iterating, and you have necessarily less transparency to how do they make the decision and things like that. So
Wow. Yeah.
that's kind of where we
Yeah, I can
are.
see a lot of development that's going to happen with AI. I mean, it's kind of still pretty new, and there's so much more that it can do. It's kind of scary sometimes to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah, very powerful.
So, do you think it's realistic for companies to move fast with AI and still be responsible at the same time?
Yes, but it starts with, don't go for the complex use case and solution if you've never done that before. Start off with the low-hanging fruit, simple processes that you can automate or leverage generative AI to improve operational efficiency. That's where most of the focus was on all the solutions I was seeing when generative AI came out is how do we help our customers be more efficient, do more with less people and faster, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the beauties of these dedicated knowledge bases that can be queried instead of, an individual having to research a big SharePoint that has thousands of documents to get the answer they
Mhm.
want. They know it's there, but they just don't remember where, and they got to,
Right.
search it. The solution can actually query that dedicated knowledge base and find the answers, in seconds, and then present it to you as a user. So then it's like, okay, great. And then you do your work. And so you're doing your work much faster. That's just one
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, that's definitely really, there's definitely a lot of helpful things. I use different AI tools to help me, especially in the marketing or summarizing things. You can actually take
Yeah.
pictures and send them to Chat GPT and it'll summarize a bunch of documents for you. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
super helpful.
Yeah. One of my clients, we sponsored an event a week or so ago. They did, so they have a solution that helps code, right? It writes code. And so they showed a demo because the founders have a history of, in the e-commerce space. And the founders said, yeah, when we built this website and this company 15 years ago, we spent 9 months and $700,000 to build the website, with the checkout and all the functionality they wanted. They did a demo with their uh, agentic solution for coding, and
Mhm.
they put in a paragraph prompt that was very high levels and said, I need to create a website with, a checkout, these kinds of products, and I need to, very high levels, not detailed specifications, more on kind of generally features and functionality. And they did the demo real time. You see the prompt go in, and then the agentic solution figures out, okay, in order to build this, here's kind of the project roadmap. We need to develop all these things, from a security standpoint, it needs to do X, Y, and Z. And so it was a very detailed project plan to build a website. And then once it went through that, then it went off and you could see it starting to write the code. And
Mhm.
within, I want to say like, I don't know if it was like 30 minutes, it had a fully functional website. You
Wow.
know,
Amazing.
now, granted, I would probably never deploy or recommend you deploy something that's just made by an agentic coding solution without testing it. You might need to fine tune it or tweak it. But, think of that, 9 months of development time historically and $700,000 versus
Mhm.
getting kind of a pretty good working model and a pretty good
Mhm.
website up and running, in 30 minutes that you can then
Yeah.
tweak and modify from there. And they showed the cost of the tokens as it was figuring all this stuff out.
Mhm.
And it was like $10 at the end
Yeah.
of the day. So $10 versus $700,000. So I
Right.
think that was a really visual, powerful demonstration of some of the capabilities of, AI in this new
Mhm.
revolution.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one. I have other examples, but I won't go into a bunch of those examples right now. But there's so many things can be done quick that used to take a long time to develop, I guess, is what we're seeing.
Hmm.
We're talking about entertainment, movies, videos, songs, all kinds of all kinds of things. It's just amazing and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, so the next couple segments. So I want to talk about kind of some merger and acquisition due diligence topics, and then after that, I want to maybe dive into a little bit of intellectual property because that's another question that comes up a lot. But let's talk about some M&A deals. If a company's being acquired that has AI models or uses AI in their products, what should the deal teams really be looking for during due diligence?
In my opinion, they should be doing the same kind of AI risk assessment, legal risk assessment of the solutions that they're buying, if it's an asset purchase agreement or if, it's going to come along with the company to assess the risks and whatever it is they're buying, because they might have second thoughts or maybe they'll set aside, to cover for some of those risks, right? So it's really important. But I don't know in the M&A community, when you're just doing investments and buying companies, I don't know if due diligence has gotten there yet. I've had some experience with that where savvy investors, or companies that want to acquire another product or another business actually think about that and realize it's more than just making sure you have a license for the LLM models and what does the license say. And, it's like you really have to figure out, okay, what is this solution doing? Where are the risks with this solution? And what potential liability is that creating if we were to acquire this company or those products, right? I spoke at a financial group that on the topic of how do CFOs assess AI risk and quantify it, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
something that, it's a little bit of a hard thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what finance teams need to be thinking about is if they are in high risk areas, if there is some inherent risk in what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
the possibility of getting sued or investigated and potential harms and what are the costs of those potential harms, the finance team needs to be thinking about those things, just like
Mm-hmm.
public companies and their SEC disclosures are expected to disclose AI risk factors.
Mm-hmm.
And more companies are doing it. But just to, kind of the earlier point I was making, when you assess risk, it's not high level. It necessarily needs to be specific to what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like the SEC has provided guidance and said, we don't want you just to say, well, generative AI is inherently risky. It's not 100% accurate. And,
Mm-hmm.
so there is some risk and we always have a human in the loop. But, it doesn't have specificity on what solutions are you using? Are you getting them from third parties? What are the nature of those? Are you building stuff internally in-house? How are you managing those risks, right? In order to be able to give investors kind of a sense of the exposure and the quantifiable risks that the company is doing, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so similarly, if you're doing M&A and you're acquiring a company, you kind of want to know, well, what potential liability am I taking on if this deal
Mm-hmm.
closes, right? Do you want to acquire a company that 6 months after acquisition, suddenly you find out that there's, you get sued in a class action, and now what you didn't realize was risky or had some
Mm-hmm.
potential liability, now you're spending millions of dollars defending a class
Yeah.
action lawsuit.
And like, how much is the company dependent? How dependent are they on AI? Like,
Right.
what
Yeah.
what if the AI produces like biased outputs or wrong outputs? Are those some of the risks that you're thinking of?
Yeah, definitely. And that all started with, the generative AI because it's inherently not accurate
Mm-hmm.
and it has a tendency to be biased and can discriminate, not intentionally. That's the interesting thing. MIT did a study on this where most of the risks that happen with these AI solutions occur post-deployment. And things like bias and discrimination are not intentional. It's just a byproduct of how generative AI works. It's able to make associations with data and it can draw conclusions. And as a result, it may be biased against certain groups. And so I had an interesting discussion with a CTO about who was building a talent acquisition solution, to filter and screen resumes. And when I got into the subject of, okay, tell me how you have tested for bias and discrimination with this solution, right? He said, well, good news. not possible because we scrub all that stuff out. We don't ingest anything
Mhm.
that could be indicative of a protected characteristic or class, right? So it's impossible for the solution to be biased or discriminatory. And so this is again where I start to pull the thread on the sweater and say, okay, well, let's follow that. Let me kind of dive a little deeper on that. So I said, this is a talent acquisition solution, right? And you're taking resumes and matching them against job descriptions to see who's a good fit, and then you rank candidates, right? So you're training it on historical data that company where it's being deployed, to tailor it to roles that have been done in the past, how people made it through, who got called for an interview, who got an offer, through the various phases, because that helps train it to figure out, okay, for this company, these are the kinds of people we're looking for. Well, what if the solution, after ingesting all that to train and fine tune that particular model, learns, well, gosh, some people from some universities get a lot of job offers. They always get interviewed, others not so much. And because it makes that association, it starts to de-rank people from that have degrees from schools that are not necessarily and historically ever been selected, right? So
Right.
the problem with that is based on the university, some universities are primarily, like Howard University, primarily one group, African Americans. And so 99% of their student body is. So if the solution learns, well, Howard University is just not a preferred university, that's kind of an example of how, even though you're scrubbing out the obvious data that could be used to be biased or discriminatory, it actually can make those data correlations and start to de-rank people from that university, which has an adverse effect on those people, and it's kind of indirect bias or unintentional bias, but it's all a byproduct of what the solution learns based on the
Right.
training that.
It's kind of maybe like a window into actual data too, instead of listening to people's presentations that are biased by themselves, by the person that creates the presentation. I mean, it could be
Mhm.
a window into actual, real data, I guess,
Mhm.
transparency, if it's correct.
Yeah, and of
But
course
it makes
that's
mistakes,
one
though,
of the
right?
challenges. That's one of the challenges with generative AI is, the concept of the black box and not having full visibility. I've been through this with developers where they will say, yeah, we don't really know why this person was an exact match for the job, but they were screened out, and others who were not an exact match, did not have all the requirements in the job description, got it passed through the initial screening phase, and they didn't know why, right? And they can try to massage the prompts and refine everything to mitigate some of that. They
Mhm.
don't always fully know why it acts the way it does, right?
Yeah,
So that's why continuous oversight is really important.
right. Yeah, it does crazy things sometimes. I make a lot of videos with AI, and it'll do stuff I didn't ask it to do at all. Like, where does it get this idea to put a basketball? Like, okay, there was like a solar system being created, like in the video, and it decided to make planets out of basketballs and baseballs. And I didn't say anything about doing it like that. So it's kind of interesting to see what it's going to do, I guess.
It improvises.
Yeah, improvises. Exactly. So I thought, you never know it's what and why it's doing it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about contracts. So, what are the most common contract gaps you're seeing when it comes to AI?
I was at a conference and there was a lawyer that got up and that was talking about one of the AI acts, and they were kind of summarizing what it was actually the Colorado AI Act and what that all means. And then they said, well, one of the things that we offer our clients is, if you're using a third party solution, we negotiate really hard with the vendors to get an indemnification that basically, if anything goes off the rails with the solution you're using, you're covered. And that was kind of where the topic was left. And I thought, ooh, that's really dangerous. I think that's actually possibly malpractice. Of course, this was in a conference. It wasn't actual legal advice, but
Right?
the part that was left unsaid, which was misleading to the audience, was generally, whether you're a developer of an AI solution or a deployer, like if you're using a third party solution, you have an obligation and a duty to prevent harms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to take reasonable steps, follow best practice to prevent harms, whether they're physical harms or digital harms.
Mm-hmm.
And so the the feeling I got from that presentation was the audience was under the belief that, well, hey, all I need is to get an indemnification from the vendor. If anything goes wrong, I'm covered and I don't have to worry about it. But because as the deployer of the solution, you have the obligation to oversee it. And actually, in some cases, many cases, you're better in a better position to be able to prevent those harms because you're actually seeing the data that you're processing in your organization. The developers don't always see that, right? They don't have access to your data
Right.
in the actual deployment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they might be able to effectively prevent bias, discrimination, and hallucinations generally, but they're not going to have visibility into your operations necessarily to monitor it and detect when that happens. So if a company thinks, hey, we're golden, we've got an indemnification in our agreement with the vendor, so we don't need to do anything. Well, I would argue that that is, if not negligence, gross negligence, because they're doing nothing to prevent harms and they have a duty and an obligation to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the carve out from an indemnification? Typically, we don't indemnify you for your own negligence,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of creates a false sense of security. Yeah, it's a great thing if you can get it,
Mm-hmm.
but most vendors now are going to be hard pressed to give you that kind of indemnification. And if they do, it's going to be very narrow, right?
Right.
It's kind of like when I was in cybersecurity, we would have customers that would say, well, we want you to indemnify us if we have a data breach. It's like, no, we can't do that, right? Because it's not
Mm-hmm.
a question of if you're going to have a breach, but when.
Right.
And then the response was, well, you don't believe in your products? Are
Right.
they not good enough? It's like, no company can. And that was kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
the deal
Huh.
breaking point. And so what I said to them was, well, good luck. Go to any one other company. And if they will give that to you, knock yourselves out, go with them. But I guarantee you, no reputable cybersecurity company is going to give you that kind of
Mm-hmm.
indemnification or warranty. And then like 3 months later, they come back and said, well, we'd like to pick up where we left off, right?
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing with something that has inherent risks and problems and issues. You're not going to be able to fully get the scope of indemnification typically
Mm-hmm.
to cover you. And even if you do, you still have to oversee it. You can't just have a hands-off approach.
Right. Yeah. And I know we talked about this before. It's really important to, if you're involved in AI and, especially big dollar stuff, you need to have a lawyer that's familiar with this space, because I don't think at this point there may be a lot of lawyers that are so familiar with this space. It's maybe there's some starting to surface, but it hasn't really been a specialty. So you're probably one of the few people that have been really, really focused on this space in the law. And that's probably another important thing for people to understand is, make sure you have the right lawyer working with you on these solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any other aspect of the law, hire a family lawyer to,
To write a
deal with
contract.
technology.
Yeah.
They don't have the foundational knowledge and experience. And really it's the experience that matters with this. And it's not about of course AI is a hot area. Everybody wants to get in on it. I've had AI consultants tell me when they find out how much work I've done in this area, they're like, "Well, I'm an AI consultant. I've only done like 15 projects in the last year." So they're kind of amazed at the exposure I've had. But definitely it's all about experience, because that's where you learn a lot, and you see things in one solution or one industry that can give you ideas. You plant a
Mhm.
seed in your head about something else, and you can then uncover something else that otherwise would not have been obvious. That's the thing, is a lot of the issues and risks are not obvious. They're not straightforward, and they only come to light after you kind of do this thorough due diligence, right? I work with a lot of patent lawyers, and I was talking with one just yesterday, and we kind of have to have the same approach. In order
Mhm.
to file a patent and write the claims for the patent application, you need to really dive in and understand the technology of whatever or the whatever it is that you're trying to get a patent on, right? You can't take a high level view because the
Right.
devil's in the details.
Hmm.
And it's that same approach with AI risk is you really have to focus on the technology, the details, features, functionality, soup to nuts, end to end, and how do you mitigate those risks? But you definitely have to dive deep into the technology.
So let's talk about intellectual property real quick. This is the question that comes up all the time, and I hear different answers. If you generate something out of IA, who owns it?
Yeah. So like copyright, this is as with a lot of things with AI and the intersection of the law, there's going to be some evolution here. I know things will be settled in some respects for a while. With respect to the copyright issue, the Copyright Office has said if you just create something like an image by prompting and say, create me an image of a basket of fruit, and it gives you four choices and you just pick one, you can't get a copyright on that image that's purely created by AI. But then they go on to say, well, but if, the human who's directing the AI is actively involved in the creative process and uses the AI more as a tool, what level of involvement and direction qualifies to be able to get a copyright on a work created by AI? And the interesting thing, there's a famous case from, I think it was about a year or so ago, where an individual created a digital image using AI, and they spent like 60 hours and 600 prompts to get the image exactly like they wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
They won the state fair in Colorado. They were like the winner of the art competition, right? And then at the end of that process, they used Photoshop to do a little bit of tweaking on the end image, right? It's very impressive. Well, the Copyright Office said, well, no copyright. It's not enough. It's like, my gosh, how many people
Oh.
would be that persistent working with an AI and iterating 600 times to get the image exactly like, if that doesn't qualify, I don't know what does, right? I mean, that's a pretty high level of involvement and creativity by the user directing the solution. So I don't think that's settled. I think we're going to see some maybe inconsistent decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll get sorted out eventually,
Where was
but
that
I
decision?
don't think in the near future. It was the patent office because
Oh.
the creator tried to copyright the work and register it with the
Mhm.
Copyright Office, and the Copyright Office said no.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, let's talk about the
Yeah, so that's,
future. So,
when
where do you
companies are,
see things
yeah,
going? That's a good
yeah.
segue into where are things headed, in the near term and in the farther future.
Wow. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's just, it's hard to
And how do you even keep
anticipate
up
where all
with
this
it
is
all?
going.
Would be another question.
Well, that's one of the challenges. So not only is the technology highly evolving, and I try to keep up with as much as I can. There's so much news about, the tech, but then at the same time, the laws are evolving. There's new laws and regulations that are specific to AI, like an AI Act or an AI regulation, but the bucket of AI law is much broader. In fact, most of the litigation that has happened so far regarding AI solutions and the harms and the errors, the bias, has not arisen under an AI statute. It's arisen. A great example of that is the Workday case, where
Mhm.
plaintiffs are alleging that Workday created an inherently biased and discriminatory resume screening solution that was used by their customers. And so they sued Workday directly, even though under employment discrimination laws, even though Workday was not the employer. And so what the court said was that essentially, well, the employers are relying upon your solution to do that function. And so, and they've kind of outsourced it to you. So you're acting as their agent. So you're directly liable for the discrimination that happens with your customers under employment discrimination laws. So that I think is pushing some of the bounds of traditional liability. And I think that's going to continue to happen because, there is a recognition that, deployers of solutions, especially third-party solutions that they don't fully understand, may have a limited ability to prevent harms. Developers, on the other hand, have, they're in a different situation. But I think increasingly we're going to see developers be held accountable for the harms that their solutions create.
Mm.
But the
Hmm.
reality is everybody gets sued, usually. In the Workday case, they didn't sue the employers or the customers.
Hmm.
And I think that was strategic. But in general, we usually see everyone involved get sued, and then the defendants have to sort it out as to who's
Right.
ultimately liable.
Wow, it's going to be a big mess of cases. And
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more of those. I think it's, yeah, because now some of these harms that are in some respects preventable or that
hmm
could be mitigated are coming to light. We're also seeing lots of attorney general investigations against companies that have leveraged AI and are, for example, using data, beyond the consent of the source data or the license and
right.
creating some other service. And so there's so many issues with this. But yeah, I think we're at the cusp of this. We're at the cusp of the amazing tech opportunity and growth in this
Hmm.
space, and so much more is to come. But at the same time, we're kind of at the cusp of the litigation starting to
Hmm.
take hold, and so I think it'll just move in parallel, right?
And in the meantime, people are just going to keep generating all kinds of stuff like crazy.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of is scary because again, going back to lots of companies don't know what they don't know about AI and AI risk,
Hmm.
and they're just kind of
Yeah.
blindly charging forward, not realizing the potential liability they're creating for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so there's nothing like, I remember it being in the house counsel and you try to inform your clients and about risk and give them advice. And sometimes they, say, well, you're the lawyer, you're just making up hypotheticals. That wouldn't really happen. And they
Right.
move ahead, but you did your job, you informed them. There's nothing like getting sued to change the attitude.
Right.
Unfortunately, that can be a
Yeah.
teaching moment. But
Yeah.
I always, because I have had so much experience, I always like presenting when I speak on AI to kind of share lessons learned because why learn mistakes on your own? Learn from the mistakes others have made, whether that has come up in litigation or just nuances of bringing solutions to market. And so I've seen a lot of different things and I kind of enjoy that. And I think the audience usually does too, because it gives it some relevance to them.
Right. Okay, good. Well, we're almost done with our session here. I have a few rapid fire questions for you. So I'm going to
Okay.
fire off. Okay. So
I'm gonna get my chat GPT ready.
yeah, right. Yeah, you can put them in Chat GPT real quick. But then the answer will be too long. Um,
Yeah,
what's the first word
I'm
that
probably
comes to
incorrect.
mind when what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear AI?
It's not a word. I would say not intelligent.
Oh, not intel. Oh, okay. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
What's harder to explain, blockchain or generative AI?
Well, for me, blockchain, because I'm not in depth involved with blockchain. I've had some experience in the past with companies that were leveraging blockchain to bring
Mhm.
solutions to market. But
But that would be harder for you to explain. Okay, that makes sense.
well, I mean, if I roll my sleeves up and get immersed in it, I think
Right.
I could probably, figure a lot of it out and work with teams. But that just goes to to the point of, when you have something that's highly technical,
Hmm.
trying to uncover the risk and provide legal advice, you really need to roll up your sleeves and understand the
Hmm.
technology. So,
Yeah. So what's your go-to productivity tool or app right now?
so we as a law firm and an intellectual property law firm are hyper concerned about confidentiality and trade secrets because we're doing work on clients' behalf to file patents, and we have a duty to maintain confidentiality and trade secrets. So we're in the process of adopting actually one of our clients' solutions that's air gapped AI. So it will allow us to deploy, fine tune small language model either on our laptops or on our enterprise network so that you can like query a knowledge base. So we could, connect our SharePoint, we could connect our email and query to try to find stuff. Right. That's really powerful because, when you've been practicing a long time, you have all this stuff that's a wealth of information, but where did I squirrel it away? Right. So,
Mhm.
but that we have a comfort with because it is air gapped. It's not going out to the cloud. And the big enterprise agreements that you can get with the major players and they're using their LLMs, they all rep and warrant, the major ones do, that they have no access to your data. They're not retraining the model using your data, right? But then many companies don't necessarily believe that because we've seen history where companies say one thing, like in the privacy context, their privacy practices. We don't do X, Y, and Z. And then it comes out later, well, they just totally ignored their privacy policy and they were doing some really horrible things with the data, right? So I think there's not a trust factor with a lot of companies to have confidence that they're not somehow compromising their confidential information and trade secrets by using an LLM in the cloud. So, so the air gap is what we're working on, and we're actually collaborating with them to develop some use cases specific to law firms. So we're kind of excited about that, and be able to tailor it to what works for us and probably other law firms too. But so it's a fun process.
Great. Well, Rob, thank you. I appreciate you being here. This was one of those conversations that cuts through the noise and gets to what really matters, how to lead responsibly in a world being shaped by AI. You brought a level of clarity and practicality that I know our audience of deal makers, operators, and legal leaders will appreciate.
Pleasure to be on your podcast, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. It was great having you. For those listening, if your organization is working through a transition, acquisition, or integration challenge, and you're facing the complexity of AI, contracts, and operational execution all at once, that's where my team at Into-Edge comes in. We specialize in post-acquisition integration, contract management, and building processes that actually work in the real world. You can learn more at intoedge.com. To connect with Rob Taylor, follow him on LinkedIn or explore his work at Karstens, Allen, and Gorley and visit their website as well. Thank you for listening to M&A Plus, the art after the deal. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.